in my humble view, I don't think one is born to be a lawyer or one is born to be an advocate. I think it's the values that surround that profession which gear you towards it.
Right.
I'm nothing. I come from nothing. I will lead my life in the nothingness of the values I hold, and I will leave my life as such.
Nikhil, welcome.
Hello, everyone.
I know I've been threatening you for quite a long time, having you on the podcast, and you initially thought I was teasing, but I wasn't. I genuinely wanted to have you as a guest because I think that it's important to have a young voice as well as the more seasoned members of the bar. So thank you.
I wish to extend my gratitude for having me on your podcast. Your podcast is obviously like a thunderbolt on in our legal world because it's a very popular podcast. So I'm very grateful for the chance of being on that podcast, and thank you for yourself to reaching out to me. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. And as you know, I've also threatened you with that I don't always have a linear way of asking my questions. So the first questions I had for you is usually my last question, but I'll ask it at first. If you hadn't been a lawyer, what would you have been?
Oh dear, that's it's just like hitting the ground running. Oh dear, I'm not sure how I would answer that question. I think it's a tricky one because every morning you wake up and it's very tough to get your act straight and make sure that you pull together and deliver what you should be delivering. So I mean, ideally I'd love to be a detective in the Brecon Bacons maybe, or a...
No way!
Yes, I mean, I love England, so I think a postman somewhere in Devon, that would be nice.
Oh, amazing.
Be a very active member
Surrounded
of the community.
by sheep and, you know.
Surrounded by sheep, I think that would be lovely. I wouldn't complain about that, but things are such that I'm here and I'm very happy to be here as well.
You come from a lineage of law. You're surrounded by lawyers, parents who are both senior counsels, very highly esteemed members of the profession, grandparents who were in the judiciary. Did you feel that you had no choice but to be a lawyer? Was it a conscious choice to also become a lawyer?
I don't think one starts an academic journey. I mean, I'll draw a parenthesis. I'm speaking to my friend. His name is Oliver Bartholomew. He's at Shoesmiths in London. And we were in law school together and we always got into trouble together. So over time, he would receive phone calls from his mother, Veronique Bartholomew, who I have a lot of affection for. And I'm very fond of her, and likewise, we're very good friends. And she always would say to Oliver, we've done everything for you as parents, and we've given you a Rolls-Royce education. So, I mean, starting from that point, whatever education you've been given, I think it's very difficult to decide at that point that I'm born to be a lawyer. In my humble view, I don't think one is born to be a lawyer or one is born to be an advocate. I think it's the values that surround that profession which gear you towards it.
Right.
In my case, like many other persons in Mauritius, I'm certainly not, by far, I'm not the first person who has family in Mauritius in law. I mean, I don't want to draw my family tree on your podcast. That would be a bit shy of messing everything up. I'll have to say that because in Mauritius, at the end of the day, a lot of people know you by virtue of who you're related to. And I don't think that this should be a cursor of the person you are.
Of course.
But you have to be alive to some of the reasons as to why you are doing certain things. And in my case, I will share that, if I may, my maternal grandfather, I mean, in Hindi we say Nani, my Nani's brother, he was a Justice of the Supreme Court at the time, in the 1970s. Then his lordship, Drupnath Ramphal. And I'm taking it from my grandmother's side, and on my mother's side, and on my father's side, my grandfather, Sir Nikhil Boolell, Queen's Counsel, he's my father's father, and he was also a member of a bar at the time. So he practiced law long before I was around, and we started off in, I think, very difficult circumstances. Both my parents, the reason why I joined Lincoln's Inn is because my mother was at Lincoln's Inn, and she had joined Lincoln's Inn because, in her own case, her own uncle was at Lincoln's Inn. And for my father as well, his father, Sir Satkam, was at Lincoln's Inn. And of course, he joined Lincoln's Inn presumably because that was the inns he felt more related to. And in my case, it became quite inevitable that I joined Lincoln's Inn. And it's quite funnily that fate has it this way, because that's why I say that I don't think you choose law when you're born. It doesn't. I don't believe in that. But I on a personal note, I don't think this is a matter of interest, but I'll share that as well because of the question you've asked. My wife happens to be a lawyer as well. Her name's Angie, and her father as well. He was a lawyer. I mean, he's a lawyer, but he was at Lincoln's Inn, and out of nowhere, I end up in a bit of a hotspot of different people.
I may be mistaken, but most lawyers in Mauritius join Middle Temple, if I'm not mistaken. So it's quite unusual that you ended up in this kind of...
I mean, I don't have this, I mean, I don't know, but I'm just trying to suggest that, I mean, I don't want to sound presumptuous in any way here, but sure. I'm just saying that there is a background as to why I became a barrister and I joined Lincoln's Inn. And I think my circumstances are such that I practice law in an environment where you have, I mean, it's the same environment you're also practicing law, and everyone who's practicing law in Mauritius now is in. We are more than 1,000 lawyers. So there's a lot of diversity in the practice of our law. I think I am fortunate to have had guiding minds who have set a certain standard as to what the expectations of my practice of law should be. And by no means that I carry that as a cursor of what I should be or shouldn't be. I think I have been grown to be independent in my views and be assertive in how I carry these views, in as much as I'm able to substantiate whatever view I have. So, I mean, that being said, I do consider law as a bit of it's like a sanctum. There's only one place in life when you're a barrister that is reserved for you. I think on the benches of a court, your place is reserved. You know that if you're a barrister, and that is I mean, we talk about how special our profession is. I mean, there are different terms ascribed to it, the noble profession, the divine profession, but I think that the place each advocate belongs is on the bar of a court, on the bar of a trial court, and that is something which is an experience we all share together.
And do you feel that, I mean, you spoke about values earlier, and perhaps these values that you grew up with has kind of nudged you along this path. What value, if you had to name one or two, which ones stand out in particular?
Oh, I see what you're doing there, Ron. You're trying to you're trying to, but I will answer it.
It's not a trick question.
No trick question, right? But I will try and answer it. I gave thought to that, and because I did think that if I knew you were going to probably ask about family background, because this is a very normal question in instances, but I did give it some thought about what kind of values we're talking about. I thought that there's one set of values that I try and encapsulate in, or try and espouse in the way I go about life. And I found the easiest reference to it in chapter 3 of the Genesis, the Old Testament.
Oh, wow, deep.
I wouldn't say, I mean, I'm not a
sure,
Bible
theologian,
bearer. I'm not a theologist in any manner. In fact, that particular part of it came to me, I think, in one of the movies I watched. I'm just saying that. It's about Adam and Eve and how there's a serpent that causes them to induce themselves in a thought process that was not the destined thought process which God had for them. And they succumbed to the temptation of tasting the fruit and all of that, right? But the background of it is when God goes on to punish each. He punishes Eve, he punishes Adam, and he punishes the serpent. But the punishment that is reserved for Adam is that he is, in my understanding, I mean, he is to carry himself so that he would plant his own crop for his food. But at the end of the day, he will return to dust. He came to this world as dust and he will return to dust. There are different interpretations to the word food. Food in the Older Testament was bread, but my point is that the values I carry is that, I mean, in a very simple term, I consider myself as dust. I mean, I wouldn't want to say, I consider myself as dust. I'm nothing, I come from nothing, I will lead my life in the nothingness of the values I hold, and I will leave my life as such. And I mean, it might sound very confused, but I do consider myself as that. I don't think I have to, in respect to the lineage which we have spoken of, and the big shrews and the towering figures, which you would think, we are in a small country, but there are towering figures behind me who have done a lot more, which I will never be able to dream of achieving. And I accept that in that whole spectrum of achievements I could be doing, I accept that there is a very strong degree of nothingness in what I do. Because on a bigger scale of things, I don't see myself as, this is not about me, but I don't see myself as anyone who will change the world or encapsulate such decision making that will, in the course of my engagement as a practitioner, as a lawyer, that will make the world a different place. I don't see myself as such. So I accept that. And I think this is a guiding principle which I carry with me. Now, I don't know if I answered your question.
Totally.
I will share that.
And I thank you for your candor and your humility. And I was going to say that's actually one of the things that I really like about you, because I can't even remember when we became friends. It kind of happened sort of organically. But when I moved back to Mauritius about 10, 12 years ago, one of the things that I found very, very difficult to deal with is people who identify themselves as their name, or their name become their identity, or rather the name of their father or their mother. And you struck me as someone who was very much not that, because you accept it as a truth, as a fact, but you do not let it become you. And I think what you've just described encapsulates that. And yeah, that's one of the reasons why I like you.
But I will share as well. I mean, I have tremendous gratitude for my parents. I mean, my mother and my father. I mean, in terms of them having brought me to the legal profession, because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be in that profession. And
Sure.
I work with my mother, Nikhil Boolell, senior counsel. I work with her, and she has had her own path. I mean, she, in her own name, is a towering figure who, I mean, she considers that she has had a lot of challenges to get to where she is, and I accept that. And today she is silk, and that's something which she has also, it has taken time to get to that stage. And I realize that this is how the profession is in Mauritius and anywhere else in the world, that it takes time for things to yield. And the circumstances in which you are able to yield the input of whatever work you do happens very differently for different people. And I think that in my regard of things, I have grown to accept that. I draw a lot of satisfaction from the work I do, from the service I dispense in the conduct of my work. I think we have a privilege as lawyers. We're able to help people who have real issues. Now, I'm not here to say that I'm a Samaritan who's here, who works in a firm where we only do pro bono and charitable work. Not at all. We are a firm, firmly geared towards helping businesses. But what many people forget about businesses is this very common theme that businesses are people at the end of the day. It's people trying to meet their ambitions, people trying to realize their dreams, and people trying to innovate and achieve things. And I draw a lot of satisfaction from being in a setup where the core of what we do evolves around, for those who may not know, I work in a law firm. The firm is called Temple Law, and it's owned and run by my mother, and there's a strong family component to that firm in as much as my father has also been part of that practice when he retired as DPP. But there's a very strong business component to it, which means that the people we represent, have expectations on our understanding of their field of work. And I think I relate, probably that this is something you relate to as well. Because the businesses you work with also have an expectation that you understand their businesses.
Sure.
And as lawyers, often we are drawn to read and
what the textbook says.
What the textbook says,
Yeah.
But also it brings us in a world that we're not familiar to. I mean, we don't know how the legal clients we represent run their businesses. And by representing them, we end up getting this knowledge. So that is something which I take a lot of satisfaction with. And of course, I work with great people, and I'm lucky that we are in a country which has great eager minds, and there is someone to challenge you, and there's always somebody brighter than everyone here. So this is something which I draw a lot of satisfaction from in Mauritius.
So speaking about, being surrounded by, you're always bound to come across someone who's brighter than you. But now there are machines who are brighter than us. You probably can guess where we're getting to. So AI.
Oh, no.
The bane of my life. It's not like I'm against it, but whenever I've tried large language models, I just found them, maybe I don't know how to use them, that they fail to understand the subtleties of, particularly when you're dealing with case law, they fail to grasp the subtleties of what is required in that time. I think they're very good at polishing language, but I think in terms of original thought and original critical thinking, il y a encore beaucoup de lacunes. So I'd love to know your thoughts on that.
It's good you mentioned that, because an important issue we're having au cabinet, un des problèmes que nous avons is this whole situation with AI. And I mean, the conversation about AI tends to be very dystopian. Nobody understands what we're talking about, AI. It's a bit this whole notion of black box syndrome. You have a black box, it's filled with words picked from here and there, and then it generates a bigger blob, and that's the blob which you rely on to do another thought process. So I think if we were very fortunate. We had a bar conference in Mauritius, and I was part of that organization, and I had suggested that a great person to come to Mauritius, which did happen, was Richard Susskind, and he did give a talk and all of that. But you may recall this conference, and we had Richard Susskind who came to Mauritius, and he was here virtually. But the big interrogation mark about that conference, I recall, was that, well, this is so dystopian. AI is you're talking about all these beautiful things, but there are more pressing issues surely in your jurisdiction than AI. And I thought about it as well. And now, a couple of years later, I think it's become a thing that you can't ignore. You can't find a way around it. And it's there to stay. And we've all accepted that. But I think AI in law is something that is even more intimidating in my view. Because what happens is, so in the law firm I'm a partner in that law firm, and one of the issues we've had is that we are having persons in the organization who are innovating. They are driving change, they're innovating. And one of the ways they're doing that in their goodwill, and I'm mindful of what I say because I know that the person will recognize himself or herself. I've left it open, himself or herself. They're generating content. Content is a perfectly important knowledge sharing process, which I'm happy to see is something which is very much alive in our jurisdiction. But the content, the written content, is AI generated. It's been generated from AI tools, LLMs, ChatGPT. There are a number of other LLMs, but we'll stick to ChatGPT being the one which people are more familiar with. And what happens is when this information and that AI-driven written content is circulated within an organization, you have other persons who are replying to that same AI content with AI responses.
Right. So you've got robots speaking to other robots.
But it's a bit like a hallucination, because and then you're sat there trying to make out who's saying what and what bit of what information is actually human driven. Now, I think that's a huge issue which we thought, well, we're in Mauritius, it's not going to happen to us yet. We're very far from what's happening to England. But I think it's not true. It's not accurate to think that way. I mean, I was looking at a newsletter from our counterparts. We're in an international network called Veritas, and the South African firm in that network, I'm using the example of South Africa, because it is also a Commonwealth jurisdiction. I won't rely on the Bar Standards Board and all the work they're doing, because you're going to tell me this is a more developed jurisdiction. Fair enough. But the South African model there are a lot of similarities between South Africa and Mauritius in terms of their location in the world and the state of development of their legal systems, I would hope. Especially, I'm referring here to the common law system. But a major issue we're having there is that AI is being used in the courtroom. And I think this is something that is also...
You mean by the judiciary or the councils advocating, or...?
I'm referring specifically to counsel. I'm not in a measure to speak about the judiciary because
Sure.
I have no knowledge of that. But I'm referring to that specific instance where it is being used in South Africa by practitioners
Right.
as part of case material which you submit to the court. And the problem is that it takes the judges time to decipher that this is a practice that it's an avenue they're being shoved in without actually getting the chance to analyze the information and dissect that this is completely non-human material. And by the time that's happened, that they've found out that, well, this is AI-generated content, well, it's affected the due process of the law.
Right.
And that is an issue which, I mean, the article I read in that insight from that South African firm spoke about the real issues they're having with that. And this is why the practice is now to proceed with the regulation in a manner that does not affect the innovation side of things. But I suppose, there may be instances in Mauritius as well where practitioners consider that it may be a more efficient approach to their work of using AI-generated content in their written submissions because it makes the process speedier. Now, I'm certain the members of our judiciary will pick on that if that is a practice that is adopted. But I think more than ever now, it is important in the practice of our industry to have these regulations put in place to at least curtail the use of AI as a means of substituting human input and human analysis, which is a part of our work which our legal clients and the due process of the law expects us to have a human input on. And I think the Bar Council in Mauritius and the other professional organizations, I'm speaking about Law Society, they will have a role to play in that because not only do we need to adhere to the standards of maybe the more developed jurisdictions that have gone further down the line and done a lot of work on that, but I think it's become important for us as well to take a stringent approach on that. And another hazard is that where we are having instances where AI is being used as a means of substituting human input, I mean, in academia, it's established. You can't have that because it falls short of plagiarism. But in a law, it's a bit more difficult because an advocate, a barrister, completely has to assume the work he submits and what's the nature of that work. And if you don't have a means of deciphering that, I mean, you have humanizers now. You can submit your AI to another AI tool, which makes the AI submission become a human submission.
Wow, I didn't know that.
I mean, it's out and about, and there are regulations on that. And you have humanizers that are good and less good. And so it's become a whole, I mean, it's a black box. It's a black box. And I think it is ample time for a collective thought process to happen on that. And there will have to be an AI Act of a legislation of sorts that comes into play in the country because that is the way it's happening everywhere else in the world. And I think that will be something that will help all of our practitioners to use AI in an ethical manner.
And it's quite interesting what you shared because I did a poll, I think, about 2 weeks ago on that subject, and I shared that I was struggling a little bit with AI-generated research and asked people what they thought. And interestingly, I would say, I believe it was 79% thought that either it was a bad thing or that if it is used, it should be sparingly and judiciously. Only 21% thought that it was a good thing, but I don't know whether they were being truthful with themselves when they say that. So I thought that was interesting. But surely there is some benefit to play devil's advocate. Surely there is some benefit in that if the original content is yours, then it can help you become more efficient, have your work be more polished perhaps. And also to the rare times I have used it, it's given me ideas. So I've been in situations where I was stuck in terms of I'm doing a puzzle, I'm trying to find an answer and I'm stuck. And I ask all sorts of questions and then out of maybe 20 answers, one of them will give me an idea, and then it is up to me and go and explore that idea. I think in that sense, they can be useful tools.
I fully agree. I think the ethical use of AI is something which is unconditional in today's digital world. And we will have to we all have to educate ourselves on how it works. One of the things I've been doing lately is I've been drafting an AI policy for our firm, because we want to try, and we're very conscious that we want to harness the innovation to help us give better work, not only to our lay clients, but also to the court and in the environment we evolve in. But I think it's important to consider how we can harness the innovation and also use it to our advantage. As you say, I think we can get a lot of support from it. And this is, unfortunately or fortunately, the way things are evolving now. I mean, AI is here to improve us, and it is a tool we'll have to use.
Yeah.
So
not to replace us.
Not to replace us,
Yeah.
yes.
Thank you. I understand that your practice is quite varied. So you do a bit of litigation, you do advisory consultancy as well. I'm not going to ask you which one you prefer, but is there any particular field of law that you have a preference, a personal preference for?
I enjoy being in court. I enjoy getting the chance to be in court, because I don't think you join the profession, and we're often told, when you join the profession, you have to go to the master's court and just be there and whip up motions, right, left, center, and just take the files and just do the motions. I'm not of that school. My pupil master, late Mrs. Mulna, senior attorney, she was my solicitor's pupil master, and she was very strict with me in that sense. She was like, you shouldn't go to court if you're not sure what you're doing.
Right.
And you should educate yourself before you step in a courtroom, because the public has expectations of how you're dispensing your duties, and more importantly, the judiciary is expecting you to assist the court. So I enjoy any dispute that has a business element to it, because it compels me to look at the business side of things, which I would not have been exposed to had I not been doing that kind of work. So I thoroughly enjoy business disputes. In our sense, it's more the civil litigation side of things. So I thoroughly enjoy that. And I also enjoy the industrial side of things. I have a mixed practice, as you have said, which means that my time allotment is such that I spend some time in the industrial and intermediate court, and I spend another part of my time when I get the opportunity before the Supreme Court. I was a bit, when I started off, I remember my father used to say that to me. I used to go nudge his brains, because my father was Nikhil Boolell. He has always taken the time, as my mother as well, but I'm referring to him specifically because I had an ethics exam I had to do when I was at the bar, and he sat down and he took a lot of time to guide me through that. And it was quite endearing, and it is something that I keep with me.
That's sweet.
But I used to complain with him. I used to say, but it's a problem, I'm not able to be in court every day of a week, and I'm not getting that opportunity. And I think this is a frustration. It's a frustration that is maybe, I measure my words, there's a lack of illumination in that frustration.
Right.
Because you feel that you want to be in court every day of a week and be doing court work and be seen in court and be doing court cases right, left, center. But I don't think it's necessarily a good thing, in the sense that, that's where my father comes in, because he had a right snap at me and he said, well, do you even know the cases you're doing?
Really?
Have you even read your papers properly?
Really?
How well informed are you about the interests of your client and the papers you have read? Are you able to assist the court as the court expects you to assist it? And I gave it some thought. I said, well, if I have cases every day, I'm not sure I'll be able to be delivering that kind of service. Now, each to his own. Some people are able to do that, and they have the skills to do that. I do not, and I accept that. But I did give thought to the process of taking time to actually appreciate the cases you have and how you are able to unclog a situation and by virtue of the advice you give and the representation you give. So that's a part of the manner in which I work, which I pay heed to that advice.
Sure.
And of course, working with my mother for the past, I'm nearing the 10-year mark now.
Wow.
So having worked with her for all that time, and it's a very strong emotional bond there, because she's a tough character, and that's the way she wanted to be. But not all of her juniors have stayed with her for as many years as I have, and she's had many juniors over the years. And I like that I've been able to stick by her side, and I still am, and that's the way I see it henceforth. And she has always been able to make sure that I have a lot of discipline in my approach, which is what it's worth today. I'm not sure I've answered your question. I've been blabbering about a lot of things here.
No, it's fascinating. I can't remember the question.
But the question
it doesn't matter. It's meant to be a conversation anyway.
Which side of the law?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
And I was taking it to my parents, and the reason for that is because when my father retired from being a DPP, I was fortunate to go to court with him because as long as he was DPP, we stayed away from all types of criminal work,
yes.
which shows,
fair enough.
in my view, I pinch him for that. It's a disservice to the practice we've had because we couldn't take any criminal work, unfortunately. But I didn't do any criminal work for a long time, except for quasi-criminal work at the industrial court for occupational health and safety offences, that kind of thing. But I didn't do any criminal work, and I was lucky to go to court with him and see how he tackles criminal cases. And I had for many years been working with my mother, and I still do, and I saw how she tackled the civil side of things, and I saw two different opposing schools of thought and two different means of working and two different strategies and two different styles, and I thought that was quite amusing. I mean, my father would rock up an authority out of nowhere after having had a collective brainstorming for hours, and my mother's the complete opposite. She would have very long, tedious conferences before turning up to court to make sure that we knew what we were doing. Ultra prepared.
What's your own style?
I'd like to take a bit of both and carry my own way. But I've been fortunate, and of course that's helped me a lot to understand certain things, which I am grateful for.
It's so lovely to hear these little different stories and what you've been able to pick up over time.
I've bombarded you with all that information now. But
sorry?
I've bombarded you with all that information.
I'm just trying to get...
You've got an Indian family guy on your show, and that's all you have.
My thought process. But it must be quite interesting because as you said, your wife is also a lawyer. Do you discuss work at home?
I try to keep her out of it, but because you mentioned her, we do. I mean, we do discuss law. I mean, it's funny because as you would want it. I mean, we met in Mauritius during pupillage. I mean, that's what you do when you come back to Mauritius as a lawyer. You're eager about the profession, but I, of course, my eyes were not only on the bar. I was thinking about my own personal interests, and that's how we met. And I dragged her on my ship, and we got married. And she would say she dragged me on her ship.
Okay, so you each have your version.
The ship is still floating. It's not a sinking ship as far as I'm concerned.
Is it a ship made out of Lego by any chance?
Oh, no.
That's not inside joke.
Yeah, inside joke. Yeah, it's not the Titanic. No, it's not. No. But we discussed law. I mean, when we got together and did I have two sisters, but I live next to my parents. I mean, an arrangement we have is I live under my parents' roof. We're neighbors. One of the plans we had when I moved back in next to my parents was that we would have our very own law library. In my own means, I got a carpenter to do all of that, and he got it's one of those with a sliding ladder. It's just that the sliding ladder is actually based on a curtain railing, which is a bit funny, but it works perfectly, and that's something we very much enjoy. We thought we would have a law library, and we have that. It serves our purposes.
Sure.
It's by no means heaven of intellect, certainly not, but that's where we like to spend our time. So to answer that part of your question, yes, I think there's a lot of synergy there as well.
Amazing. And what's your favorite book from that library, if you had to pick one?
Ah, dear, that's a trick question again from you.
Not Postman Pat, I hope.
It's not Postman Pat, and it's not Barney Goes to London Zoo, no. There's several books that have marked me, but I think in terms of authoritative guidance on how there are a lot of books about barristers, by no means. I mean, I enjoyed reading John Grisham. That's the passionate image of a lawyer, which drew me to it. But I think in terms of an authoritative book to understand the basis of the law, I found Tom Bingham's Rule of Law is very good. In my view, it's not very cumbersome to read. It's a good read. And it's very approachable and friendly. And in fact, I would recommend, I mean, because I'm here speaking as a younger lawyer, I would recommend anyone who starts off in law to read that book. Okay. It's not very thick for anyone who's concerned about the thickness of it.
Yeah,
but it's very dicey. No pun intended there.
I might have to borrow it. I'm looking on my table because I had a book there. I don't know whether I took it back home, but that's the one book that I remember when I did. As you probably know, I didn't have a conventional route into the bar. I was a solicitor first, and then I just had to do a transfer test, which was fairly easy. I just had an ethics exam and an advocacy exam. And I remember when I was doing my advocacy exam, someone asked me to read, I think it's called The Devil's Advocate or something
Yes.
like that. And it's quite funny because I started rereading it again. It's meant to be for lawyers with 5 or less years. But I thought, one can never be too old to refresh one's mind. So I really enjoyed that one as well. You did, well, actually, you and your wife did an LLM in tax law. Yours was in tax law as well, right? Yeah.
It was not, no.
I
Yes.
thought you did an LLM in tax.
There was
okay.
a major module taught by Jonathan Schwartz in
Right.
international tax.
Okay. But that was just one module.
It was one module
Okay,
of the course. We spent a lot of time talking about the Formula One case, which I still have trouble grasping.
Okay.
But yes, we did. I did part of that.
Would you advise someone to do an LLM? I guess it's a personal choice, but do you think there's any benefit for a qualified practitioner to do a master's?
It's a very tricky question because I think the first thing about an LLM is that you have, unless you're a Chevening scholar, it's a funded program. So the first issue you have is you need to make sure you're able to finance yourself to do that program. And if you're doing an LLM, I would only advise that if you're doing it at a certain time in your career, which I would personally strongly advise you do, that it's done in England. That's my personal opinion about it.
Why?
I mean, I'm very fond of England, but that's my subjective take on it. But the reality of it is, I mean, when I started off, I did boarding school in England. I was at the United Royal College of Atlantic and Wales. I was fortunate to I had a silver spoon, which took me there, and I'm grateful for that. I then went on to read law at the University of Exeter, and I did a year in France at the University of Rennes 1. But what that meant is the understanding of the law I had, assuming that I was returning to Mauritius, was constricted to English law in England. So there wasn't much take I had on the practice of law in Mauritius. And in fact, it's quite laudable that the Institute of Judicial and Legal Studies in Mauritius imposes on all new practicing prospective barristers that they do this course with practitioners and members of the judiciary, which is a very good thing because it gives you a feel of what the practice of law in Mauritius is. Because I think the practice of law in Mauritius is a trade of itself. I think.
And Mauritian law is not English law.
It's not. And we should be proud of that we have our very own hybrid system, and we're probably the few countries in the world that get the laws to speak in French. So we should be proud of that. And I mean, I remember my parents were very good friends. Lord Leicester was a personal family friend, and I'm grateful again because I've benefited a lot from the relationships which my parents have nurtured over the years with their own peers at the bar and their own seniors. And one of those people, I mean, there are many people, but one of those people was Lord Leicester. And he would always say that his experience of the practice of law in Mauritius, and he was an eminent, as you will know, he was a very eminent law practitioner. He also sat at the House of Lords and all of that. But his feel of law in Mauritius was very different because he thought that, well, it was a breed of its own, and you could be silk in England or the highest earning lawyer in England. But if you come before a court in Mauritius, whoever is up against you would give you a good all run for your money, in my understanding, for what it's worth. Yeah. I think that if there has been a lot of discussion about the specialization and the need for specialization in our jurisdiction. Now, you're a prime example of that because you have developed a tax practice. And I mean, you're better placed than me to speak about that. But I think that you are in a trade now where there are so many lawyers that if you are dispensing service, I think it's your public duty to have a field which you are more conversant with. And I don't think it's fair towards the court that you're conversant in all the fields of law and you profess to be conversant in all the fields of law, and that's who you are. But Mauritius being a smaller jurisdiction means that, unfortunately, we don't have a volume of work for everyone. And maybe I'm wrong, but I feel that this is maybe the case. Now, if you are to deliver a certain line of work and represent people with real issues in court and advocate before the public forum of a court of law, in the sanctum of a court, I think it's important that you are representing cases where you are able to assist the court. And at the time, I did my LLM well after I had done my undergrad studies. It was 5 or 6 years after I did my bar. And in fact, at the time, I did my LLM with King's College of London. And in fact, I had decided that I would leave Mauritius and go back to libraries, to law school in England, and do an LLM so that I would educate myself more about a line of work which was relevant to my practice, which was international. I do a lot of business work, but it was in international finance law. So I did that LLM to harness my skills and educate myself on what was going on in the world. And that for me has turned out to be critical. And at the time I did that LLM, I don't know if that's how fate wanted it. It was the first year of COVID. So while I had planned to leave Mauritius and maybe become a postman in England, I could not do that.
Didn't quite work out. The universe didn't want that for you.
and you can rest assured that my mother made sure that if I was doing it part-time and she was going to assist me in funding of that program, that I would work in the morning and afternoon at the law firm. And so I would be on my own in that because
So you were working at the same time?
I was working until 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And during the whole length of the program, because it was now a hybrid online program, if you want.
And England was 3-4 hours behind.
3 or 4 hours difference. So I had dinner and I worked through the night. And I did that for 6-7 months. And I think the early mornings I became very accustomed to it. And it wasn't easy because I had just gotten married and my wife as well was a lawyer. And she was like, well, why do you get the privilege of doing an LLM and requiring all the resources of the household when I'm also a practicing lawyer and you're nothing special, getting so much attention in the house, but you're doing an LLM and all of that. So I had that.
So then she did.
So then she was like, well, I'm going to do my LLM now, and you're going to have the reverse of the pudding. So that's how it happened. And I'm grateful for that because I met a number of law practitioners who were like me, had not just started law, they had been practicing law in their respective countries for several years. I met tutors and leading law practitioners. I mean, you're a King's alumni, so you know very well the standard of people who you meet, and I'm grateful for that. And as I say, it's a funded program, so I'm grateful again that not everybody gets the chance to do it. Sure. But if you do get the chance, I would really advise that you jump on the bandwagon and do it for sure.
So interesting that you say that. I always thought after I finished my undergraduate that I would never study again, although I'm one of these weird people who love exams. Like, give me an exam any day.
You're very bookish. Yeah.
I am, but it was just the thought of having to actually study as opposed to doing the exam, which I love. But this is going to sound so weird. But anyway, but having said that, I think the tax LLM at King's is first class, and perhaps when my children grow older, that I'll be tempted to do that.
A boarding school first.
Yeah, yes, exactly. Actually, boarding school. We're going to talk about boarding school very quickly because, I've been fascinated with that because I know there are some people sending their kids to boarding school in Mauritius, and we all know what the state system is like for all its flaws and advantages and downsides. But do you think it shaped you in a different way? So you went to both state schools and private schools in Mauritius, and then you went to spend a couple of years in the UK before uni. What perspective did that give you? How did it shape you differently than it would have perhaps if you had stayed here?
My education has pretty much been like the education of many people in Mauritius, and I'm proud of it because I'm born and bred here, and I'm working here. So I'm who I am by virtue of being here. I'm a Mauritius product. I was in pastoral care, if you want. I mean, I use that term, but if you want, I was a convent of Loreto Vacqua student, so I did primary school there. And then being a straight 5A student, I wasn't good enough to join government school. So I was dispatched very quickly and very quietly to private schooling. So I attended Bocage. Being a 5A student, that was not good enough in Mauritius. In Mauritius, you know how things are, standards are off the roof. And I had a very good time studying at Bocage, which I would recommend to anyone as a former student of that school. And the Bocage International School is a very good school. And I mean, I didn't really address my mind to all these things until I have a daughter. So now I think about, it's one of the most challenging questions I'm having to make we are having, I'm referring to my wife as well, to make a decision on is about schooling. And
Sure.
so I attended Bukhara, which is a private school, which was very good to me. And I'm grateful for that as well. And after that, when I was 15, I did good enough in my IGCSEs. And again, my good A's took me to boarding school at the Atlantic College in Wales, which is a founding United World College school, which, along with International School of Geneva, really embeds all of the Kurt Hahn principles about global education, peace, challenging thought processes, and all of that. So I did 2 years in boarding school when I was 15, which it was a living boarding school in Wales. It was St Donat's Castle, which is a hearse castle. The Hearst family has always been industrialist family in the States in coal. It being a William Hearst institution, castle, meant that there was a lot of effort to keep the castle as it had always been, which was a privilege again of being in education in England. And after that, I went to read law at Exeter. But I mean, boarding school has been a very important part of my life. It still is. I mean, when I go to England, I'm still trying to slot time to visit it again after I have left it so many years ago now. It's more than 12 years ago now, I think. I have made many friends from different countries, many friends who were in much better circumstances and with a lot more privilege than I, and a lot of friends who had a lot less privilege than I. I mean, but we all gelled on that basis, and it was formidable. We would share, we would have open bathrooms. We would all...
Was it a boys' school?
Boys, it was a mixed school. Okay. So there would be 7 boarding houses, and the boys would be on the ground floor, and we would be 4 boys in a room. We would be 10 rooms, and we'd share a very small space together. I'm talking about, you only have a bed and a wardrobe, and that's it. And the rest of it is shared. And the girls are upstairs, and you have communal showers, the old school rugby showers, where there's just a shower head coming out, and everyone shares the same shower. So on the day you get there, you've met somebody for the first time, and it's
stripped naked,
and you're stripped naked having a shower at the end of the day, which is, and we're all like, in Indian background, you can imagine you're all very conscious about what your bits and bobs and all of that. That built in a grit in me, I think, because I mean, when I made that biblical reference earlier, I mean, it might sound very virtuous and all of that. It was not the intention of sounding as such, but what I mean to say is that very soon I had the opportunity of getting life experiences that till today I carry, and this has helped me be the person I am today. And I try to be a good person in the community and contribute to my own neighbourhood. I mean, I try to keep my street clean. I try and do some recycling. These are things that I have carried with myself, and that's what the boarding school has taught me. I mean, boarding school taught me that change starts from within, and change starts within your own community. I mean, there's no point aspiring to bigger things in life if you're not going to start with yourself. And it's lovely because where we moved in, I mean, I've done a lot of community work to try and embed what we value. And I mean, it started off with cleaning off the street and becoming good friends with all of my neighbours, and that's been a good thing. And likewise, I mean, I learned a lot from them, we learn a lot from me, and it goes good ways, and we all live as a community. So I mean, it sounds very, in Mauritius where everyone keeps to themselves, I mean, being neighbours to my parents, they were not particularly impressed by that, but it's grown on them a lot, I have to say. But community development, and the bar is that place. The bar is a wide community where there are seniors, there are intellectuals, there are people who are knowledgeable about life experiences, and us younger lot, I mean, I refer to us younger lot, you're not in that, unfortunately, Ron, you're much older to me, but the younger lot, we have this privilege. When you sit in a bench in court, there is a bench in front of you, which is the inner bar. It's not every profession that has this in Mauritius. There is the inner bar, and if you're courteous and polite, the distinguished people who sit at the inner bar and who are likewise very conversant with members of the judiciary, the judges of our Supreme Court, they will heed to you, they will accept you, and they will give you advice. That's in your household. You may not have good advice, but in the benches of the courtroom, you will get good advice. You will have different advices which you can weigh. And that's a privilege of doing pupillage in Mauritius. The pupil masters you have in Mauritius will spend the time with you, and they will find out who you are, what your background is, and how you have gotten to where you are. And that is a nominal expectation of any relationship in life. But they will share their wisdom with you. And you have some incredibly generous people in Mauritius who participate in education at the bar and formation and mentorship in a manner that you would never have anywhere else in the world. I mean, I did part of my pupillage at Willan Chambers, and there's incredible care for the manner in which people are treated. I mean, you have a common mess room. I mean, lunch was offered to everyone who was a pupil there. That's a privilege that not every independent red brick set in Mauritius offers. So, I mean, this for me is something that did mark my apprenticeship and pupillage, because I did obtain experiences which I would never have had. So I think if I have answered your question, I'm not sure about that as well.
Yes, no, you have. And actually, you answered what was going to be my last question as well. I just wanted to thank you, because I don't think I've invited many young lawyers on this podcast. I think I've only invited a few. You're definitely an old soul, because you're so wise beyond your years. But it's refreshing to have such a humble view of the world, of the role that you play. And I'm sure you play a much bigger role than you give yourself credit for. And I have no doubt that you will continue the legacy of the names that your parents and your forefathers have built before you. So thank you.
That makes me feel like I'm a bit of an old sock, really. I'm not one, but I wish to extend my appreciation to yourself, Ron, for having me on your podcast. And I'm glad to talk about law in Mauritius, and that's something I would wish we can do more.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nikhil.